All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Oops. I have to click share. Where's the share button?
Down in the bottom, the green.
Oh yeah, there. Okay. All right, can you see it?
Yep, there you go. We're all set.
All right, okay, great. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are going to cover the Targeted Runoff Management or TRM grant application cycle for calendar year 2024 awards. I'm Joanna Griffin. I'm the Runoff Management Grants Program Coordinator here at Wisconsin DNR. So today we're going to cover the TRM program overview. Then I will talk about application information and requirements, and then anything new from last year that has changed or that is new this year. So as part of the overview, I am going to discuss all the grant resources you have available, eligible applicants, go over reimbursements and cost sharing, the different types of grants and examples. So our TRM grant website can be found by going to the main DNR website and typing TRM in the search bar. Here you'll find tabs with information, applications and important forms, and links to relevant laws. As you'll learn later in the presentation, there are 4 categories of TRM grants. As part of the small scale TMDL category, there's also an urban TRM grant. Information on this urban TRM grant is available on this website. For purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the agricultural TRM grants, but I'll provide a short summary of the urban TRM grant later in the presentation. All right. The TRM program exists under the authority established in 281.65 and NR 153. NR 154 identifies best management practices, technical standards, and cost share conditions that apply to the department, state agencies, governmental units, the Board of Regents, and cost share recipients when serving to provide or receive cost share funds under NR 153. NR 151 establishes runoff pollution performance standards for non-agricultural facilities and transportation facilities, and performance standards and prohibitions for agricultural facilities and practices designed to achieve water quality standards. Here's a map of all of the DNR runoff TRM grant coordinators. So as I said, I'm the statewide coordinator, but the staff here are your main contacts for specific projects and grants in your counties. We do have a few vacancies at the moment, or a couple of vacancies. So in the South Central region, Cindy and Jesse are covering those green counties at the moment. If you're unsure who to talk to, you could certainly reach out to me or Corrine, and we can tell you who to reach out to if you have questions about specific grant projects. And then in the gray area here, there's also a vacancy, and Erin Hansen is covering for those counties. So as I mentioned again in the previous slide, I'm the grants coordinator. I work on the following: grant eligibility, application forms, instructions, intake, scoring, ranking, and allocations. Regional non-point source coordinators, the map we showed a minute ago, they also do grant eligibility. They will have the pre-application discussion with you that's required. They help with screening, grant implementation, final report, and reimbursements. Corrine Johnson is our grants manager, and Corrine and I work very closely together. She focuses mostly on everything from the grant award on. So amendments, reimbursements, everything after that piece and the financial side of things. However, we work together on grant eligibility and allocations. And then we have Molly Richardson, who's the BITS Data System Coordinator. And BITS is a BMP implementation tracking system. Molly helps with the development of the database, manages the system, helps with data entry and IT support. And this is the system that all of the final reports are entered into. So I want to share a little bit about our funding information. For TRM grants, the majority of funding comes from state bond revenue. So this is just sort of a snapshot of last year, or the grants that are funded this year in 2023. Bond revenue can be used anywhere in the state, but only used for construction of structural practices or force account, or activities directly related to the construction of structural practices. It can also reimburse nutrient management plans, but only when it's part of a project that includes construction of manure storage or barnyard. So last year, or this year, we were able to allocate almost 2.5 million in state bond revenue to TRM projects. Federal 319 project funds also comprise a significant piece of the overall funding and can be used for both cropping practices and local assistance. These funds can only reimburse work done in areas that are covered by an EPA approved 9 key element plan. So this can also pay for structural practices. We try to use this funding for cropping and local assistance because it's really the only source of funding that can cover those practices. We also have state segregated funds, which are flexible. They can be used anywhere in Wisconsin for cropping, structural, and local assistance. However, we only receive $100,000 a year in that funding. And we try to, because we've had limited 319 and state segregated funds, we focus the funding here in our large scale TRM grants to be at a more watershed approach. All right, here is a typical grant timeline. And this year we posted our grant applications on January 13th. Because normally we do January 15th, but that was a weekend, so we decided to do it the Friday before. We have webinars where today we are giving a webinar, usually around mid-February. The applications are due on April 15th, unless that falls on a weekend, which it happens to this year. So the application deadline will actually be April 17th this year. Between April 17th and July, we will screen, score, and rank the applications. And then on the first Tuesday in August, we will go to the Land and Water Conservation Board meeting with our ranked list, our draft funding line, and preliminary allocation plans. This may change if we don't, because it's a budget year, and if we do not have the budget yet, we will not be able to do our allocations at this time, and we may need to wait until the October meeting. If we wait till the October meeting, then the final list would actually be in December. And if not, we would have the final list in October. And then we hope to, depending on the budget, do our grant awards in November or December of 2023. So I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, Joanna. But just as a reminder to the group, if you do have questions, please use the chat feature and send them directly to Corinne, who's our Q&A monitor.
All right. So eligible applicants are governmental units. So that is any of these listed here. So counties, cities, villages, towns, sewerage districts, sanitary districts, lake districts, Regional Planning Commission, etc. So this is a summary of what all agricultural TRM grants have in common. All agricultural TRM grants provide cost share reimbursement for the control of non-point source agricultural pollution through the construction and implementation of agricultural best management practices, or BMPs. They offer 70% reimbursement of eligible costs, and if there is economic hardship, up to 90%. TRM grants only reimburse construction or implementation of BMPs if there's not already been an offer, an NR 151 offer of cost sharing. So this means an offer of cost sharing as part of an NR 151 notice or county notice that meets the requirements of NR 151.09 or NR 151.095. And they only reimburse construction and implementation of BMPs that are located on sites that are not covered by WPDES permits. So TRM is a reimbursement grant program. So this means that no money is provided by the state until money has been spent by the landowner to install BMPs. Under a typical TRM grant, DNR issues a grant award. The landowner spend the money to construct the project and then request reimbursement from the grantee, which is typically a county. The grantee reimburses the landowner based on the cost share rate and amount spent. So in this example, it's 70%. It could be up to 90%. After the project is constructed and the grantee reimburses the landowner, then the grantee requests and receives reimbursement from the state. There are two other variations on this process, but this is the most common one. So I'll show you the other two as well. So an acceptable deviation to this sequence is when the landowner completes the project and pays only their share of the project costs directly to the vendor, which is typically 30%. The grantee can then pay up to the cost share rate of eligible costs directly to the vendor. This option is advantageous to the landowner because they only have to come up with the local share of project costs rather than the full costs, and then wait to be reimbursed. And the grantee still has to wait for reimbursement. The third option available allows the grantee to request state share reimbursement from DNR before reimbursing the landowner, which is shown in this slide here. The reason we added this option was to increase feasibility of utilizing the TRM grant program in counties that don't have enough cash on hand to reimburse the landowner before being reimbursed by the DNR. So another thing that's the same for all TRM grants is that higher cost share rate is available in cases of economic hardship. The economic hardship criteria is established in NR 154.03. So in order for a landowner to meet the economic hardship criteria and qualify for the higher cost share rate, they must submit an application to the governmental unit, and then the governmental unit makes a determination of economic hardship. The governmental unit referred to in NR 154 is the grantee, which is typically a county. The determination of the economic hardship is typically made by the county based on their evaluation of an application submitted by the landowner. However, in order for the DNR to reimburse the grantee at a higher cost share rate, the 90% rate must be in the grant agreement between the DNR and the county. So any county that approves economic hardship must communicate this to the DNR and get the higher cost share rate in the grant agreement. NR 154 provides the information that must be included in the application from the landowner to the grantee in order to evaluate whether economic hardship exists. Either a CPA or an accredited financial institution must certify that the landowner is unable to make the 30% cost share contribution, which is normally required, but is able to make the 10% cost share contribution. And a link to NR 154 is found on the TRM grant website. Additionally, NR 154 requires that the landowner provide a sworn affidavit that the information they've provided to the CPA or financial institution is a full and true disclosure of their financial condition. So NR 154 does not give DNR authority to specify the method, but it does give DNR authority to require that it approve the method that's used by the CPA or the financial institution. And I can pause for a minute to see if we have any questions before I go on to the next section.
Thanks, Joanna. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I think we can safely move on to the next section.
All right. So now I'm going to talk about the different types of TRM grants and categories. So TRM grants are split into two different types based on the problems they address. So either a TMDL, which is a non-TMDL or NR 151 compliance, and then TMDL implementation. And then large and small scale projects. So we end up with 4 different types of TRM grants. TMDL TRM grants are for projects located in a watershed covered by an EPA approved TMDL or total maximum daily loads. TMDL TRM grants must implement the pollutant specific goals of an EPA approved TMDL. So in the TRM grant program, BMPs are only eligible for cost share reimbursement if construction of the BMP either achieves compliance with one or more currently non-compliant NR 151 agricultural performance standards and prohibition, or implements a TMDL. Because non-TMDL projects are not located in a TMDL watershed, they must achieve compliance with one or more non-compliant NR 151 performance standards and prohibitions at facilities that are not now and have never previously been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard. And the reimbursement is for compliance costs of existing facilities and cropland only. Sometimes, though, an NR 151 compliance is part of implementing a TMDL, so that although non-TMDL TRM grants must address NR 151 non-compliance, TMDL TRM grants may address NR 151 non-compliance if doing so is required to implement the TMDL. So unlike non-TMDL TRM grants, TMDL TRM projects can also cost share BMPs that exceed performance standards at sites that are already in compliance, if doing so is required for implementation of pollutant-specific TMDL goals. So if meeting the pollutant load reductions of a TMDL means going above and beyond just implementing the standards, TRM can fund this. And TMDL TRM grants can also cost share BMPs that address pollution problems if there is no performance standard, if doing so is required for implementation of the pollutant-specific TMDL goals. So we've learned that both non-TMDL and TMDL grants can fund NR 151 performance standard compliance at facilities that are not now and have never previously been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard, and reimbursement is for compliance costs of existing facilities, cropland only. So this type of TRM project, NR 151 compliance, is frequently the source of confusion with the program. Specifically, there's common confusion regarding how to determine whether or not a particular facility meets the eligibility criteria. So to help clear things up, let's go over some example scenarios and try to determine if they would be eligible for TRM grants to address NR 151 non-compliance. Since non-TMDL TRM grants must address NR 151 non-compliance, I'll refer to this project as a non-TMDL TRM grant as we go through the examples. Just keep in mind that TMDL TRM grants can also address NR 151 non-compliance. And when they do, the same eligibility criteria applies. So let's go through an example to better understand how TMDL and non-TMDL TRM grants are different. For this example, the landowner wants to reduce pollution by stabilizing eroding stream banks. So is this an eligible non-TMDL TRM project? And is it eligible TMDL TRM project? So let's look at the non-TMDL question first. Is stream bank stabilization an eligible non-TMDL TRM project? And the answer is yes. And that's because this is a non-TMDL project. The project must address non-compliance with an NR 151 performance standard. For example, in this photo, we see a situation in which erosion appears to be caused by unlimited livestock access to the stream. Here's a list of the agricultural performance standards and prohibitions from one of the TRM grant applications. Listed at the bottom is the agricultural prohibition, prevention of unlimited livestock access to waters of the state, where high concentrations of animals prevent the maintenance of adequate sod cover or self-sustaining vegetation. So if this project is stabilizing stream bank as part of addressing this non-compliance through fencing or relocation, then yes, this is an eligible non-TMDL TRM project. You can see the same site in this photo. The stream banks have been revegetated and animals no longer have unlimited access to the stream. So let's consider the TMDL scenario. Is stream bank stabilization an eligible TMDL TRM grant? We already learned that both TMDL and non-TMDL TRM grants can address non-compliance with NR 151. So the answer has to be yes for the same reason, under the same conditions. Are there any other conditions under which a TMDL TRM grant could fund stream bank practices? We learned earlier that TMDL projects can address pollution sources for which there's no performance standard. So if we consider a scenario in which stream bank erosion is not caused by non-compliance or unlimited animal access, rather by changes in watershed hydrology due to agricultural land use in the upstream watershed, there's no performance standard that addresses erosion due to upstream changes in hydrology, even though this can be a significant pollution source. So in such instances, stream bank stabilization would be eligible TMDL TRM grant, eligible TMDL TRM project, as long as the land use causing the erosion is agricultural, and as long as the stream bank stabilization implements the pollutant-specific goals of the TMDL. Are there any questions related to TMDL and non-TMDL grants or anything we've already talked about? I'll pause for a second here.
No, we are good.
All right. So let's look at the second way that agricultural TRM grants are divided. So that is large scale versus small scale. So as their name suggests, large scale TRM grants cover a larger area. Small scale TRM grants typically cover an individual farm, whereas large scale TRM grants cover a watershed. So BMPs are constructed and implemented on multiple sites within the watershed. If it's a non-TMDL TRM project for large scale TRM, the size of the watershed must be between 8 and 39 square miles. If it's a large-scale TMDL trim grant, then the watershed size is determined by the size of the TMDL. Or for a larger TMDL, it might be the size of a TMDL watershed reach. The maximum award for small scale is $225,000, and for large scale, $600,000. Small scale trim grants the grant period is 2 years, and for large scale, the grant period is 3 years. Both large and small scale trim grantees may request a 1-year project extension. Extensions are not guaranteed, and grantees can't apply for a grant with that project schedule that intends to take longer than allowed by the initial grant period. Another difference between large and small scale is the type of expenses that can be funded. So in addition to reimbursing BMP construction costs, small scale trim grantees can request a force account. And that is, they can be reimbursed 5% of the state share amount under that trim grant project. And large scale trim grantees cannot request force account, but can request local assistance. And the maximum amount is 40% of the amount reimbursed for BMPs. I'm going to go into a little more detail about what force account and local assistance are. So force account is work done by the grantee's own employees or by the grantee's own equipment that's directly related to the design and construction of the BMPs constructed by the project. And as I said before, this is used in the small scale trim grants. Local assistance is reimbursement for staffing activities needed to carry out the project. Although local assistance activities must be project related, they don't have to be directly related to the design and construction of an installed BMP. So there's a little more flexibility. And this is used in large scale trim grants. So some examples of the local assistance activities are listed here. For the full list, you please refer to NR 153.16. So identifying pollution sources, contacting landowners, documenting compliance, identifying BMPs, those are all examples of local assistance activities that are eligible. Another difference between the two grant programs is the type of BMPs that the program can reimburse. So small scale trim grants can only reimburse construction of structural BMPs, and large scale can reimburse implementation of cropping or non-structural. Another difference is that small scale trim grants can only fund nutrient management plan development if the nutrient management plan is developed in conjunction with the construction of a manure storage or barnyard runoff control project, also funded as part of the same grant. Whereas large scale trim can fund nutrient management plan as a standalone practice. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier in the talk, this is mostly focused on agricultural trim grants. I want to share a few things about our urban TMDL trim grant. So these compete directly with our small scale agricultural TMDL projects. They must be designed to achieve attainment of non-agricultural performance standards. They must address existing urban development. And that means that they have to be the urban development has to be in existence prior to October 1st, 2004. They must contribute to the removal of surface waters from the state impaired water list and be consistent with a TMDL. And they may not be used for NR 216 permit compliance. So unlike our other urban non-point source and stormwater grants, which are used for NR 216 permit compliance, our TMDL small scale urban trim grant may not be used for NR 216 permit compliance. All right, so now I'm going to go into another example subset of eligibility. So in this first example, we have a livestock facility that's been in existence since before the effective date of the performance standard addressed by the project. And during the time since the performance standard went into effect, the facility expanded from 500 to 600 animal units. Is this site eligible for a non-TMDL agricultural trim grant? And at this point, it depends. We do not have enough information to tell whether it's eligible or not. Just knowing how many animal units there are doesn't tell us whether the site is eligible for a grant. So if we add more information, we now know that the performance standard status as well. So the performance standard was compliant before the effective date and is now non-compliant. This example is not eligible. So even though the site existed at the time the performance standard went into effect, it was in compliance at that time. In order to be eligible for a non-TMDL trim grant, the facility must be not now and never previously been in compliance since the effective date of the applicable performance standard. If a livestock facility falls out of compliance due to expansion, it is not eligible for a non-TMDL trim grant. So here is another example. In this case, the status was non-compliant and now it's compliant. In this case, the project is not eligible because it's already in compliance. So we are not cost sharing grants that are in for facilities that are in compliance. Okay, so in this example, the performance standard status was non-compliant before and is still non-compliant. So this project is eligible. It was in existence and has been continuously non-compliant. So how can it be eligible when the number of animal units increased from 500 to 600? And that's because the magnitude of expansion is not significant as defined by NR 153.15. So a non-significant expansion is the base animal units plus 20% of the animal unit increase. So non-significant livestock facility expansions are TRM eligible. In the last example, the facility has undergone significant expansion. So like the previous scenario, the site was in existence and continuously non-compliant since the effective date of the applicable NR 151 performance standards. However, unlike the other scenarios, the number of animal units increased from 200 to 900. So this project is eligible, but only the cost of bringing the facilities in existence on the effective date are eligible of the performance standard and prohibition are eligible. So if the landowner is designing a facility for all 900 animal units, the eligible costs must be prorated by determining the base animal units that existed when the performance standard went into effect and then calculating a non-significant expansion of that number. So a non-significant expansion of 200 animal units in this example is 250 animal units. Since the facility was designed for 900 animal units, the applicant would divide 250 by 900 and determine that 28% of the total project costs are eligible for cost sharing. So it's partially eligible. So the form is set up to calculate this for you. If you answer yes to the question about whether the application is a livestock facility, the application will prompt you to enter the number of base and design animal units into Part 3B of the small scale TRM application. And the application will tell you, one, the proposed increase. Is the proposed increase considered significant or non-significant expansion? And if it's significant, the percentage by which eligible costs must be prorated. So in this case, a non-significant expansion is a total of 300, and prorating that, 67% of all project costs are eligible for proration. I'm going to take a break before we go on to the next section here. Any questions?
We do have a question for you, Joanna.
Mhm.
So if it is, would a silage leachate pit or a waste storage facility be an eligible specific practice to apply for a TRM grant proposal? In a little more detail about this particular project, this would be a small scale in a soon-to-be TMDL project area currently covered by 9 key element plan. And if Karine, if you have anything to add to that, please feel free to jump in as well.
I'm happy to take this one, Joanna, if you'd like me to.
Yes, please.
Okay. Staring at it. They've been staring at it for a while. Okay, so the question is, would a silage leachate pit be eligible? Yes, potentially. So essentially a waste storage facility to capture feed storage leachate could be eligible. This is a good question though. You said a soon to be TMDL. In order for it to be considered a TMDL project, obviously the TMDL would have to be for nutrients, and the TMDL would need to be EPA approved by the time the application is submitted. So if it's anticipated that the TMDL won't be EPA approved by April 17th, then you'd have to be still considered a non-TMDL project. And then, like Joanna said, obviously with non-TMDL projects, you would have to be addressing compliance or non-compliance with a performance standard. So I would assume you'd be looking at the process wastewater performance standard and non-compliance with that particular performance standard. So yes, a waste storage facility for that purpose could be eligible, depending on the timing of the TMDL. Could be a TMDL project, or it could be a non-TMDL project if that TMDL is not yet EPA approved.
And I just want to add on, I think a 9 key element plan could, can that substitute for a TMDL in some cases?
In some cases, yes. You could treat the 9 element plan. We have limited instances where we have treated 9 element plans as a TMDL. So that's something we could discuss offline, the requirements for that. But that was a really good question.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions?
No, at this time, that's all we have.
All right, let's go on to the next topic. So we did the overview, and now we're going to talk about application information and requirements. So I do get many questions on scoring, so I'm going to go over how we score our grants a little bit. The details are provided in the instructions, so it'll be much more detailed if you read the instructions and all the different sections. There are some scoring sections that are based on the location of the project. So water quality need is one of the highest scoring components. Impaired waters receive the most points. And within the impaired water category, TMDLs receive the highest score. And this is because the TMDL analysis provides additional information and helps target implementation. So the application places equal importance on groundwater and surface water. And because the water quality need components are based on project location, applicants don't have the ability to modify these scores. We also provide bonus points if the grant project is within a 9 key element plan area or a public drinking water supply area. More points are awarded if a grantee is a municipality or county that enforces ordinances relevant to the project. More points are awarded if prior work has been completed. It is important to have a detailed project budget and schedule and to build local support for the project ahead of the application. We want as much relevant detail as possible, and we want you to answer the questions completely. So scores may increase or decrease based on how the questions were answered. And some questions on the application forms require a narrative response and are more qualitative. So in those cases, scores are based on the following. Was the question answered? To what extent was it answered? Like how much detail was provided? Were all the components addressed? And was the answer clear? As I mentioned earlier, the grant application instructions are located on our website. The instructions have a header that indicates the part of and the question of the application covered on that page. They are divided into columns. So the left has the directions and then the right maybe some additional explanation. The instructions explain in detail the scoring criteria for each of the competitive elements. As part of the grant project, it's required that the grantee identify and establish an authorized responsible governmental official or ARGO. The ARGO is the only person that'll be able to sign and submit grant agreements, amendment requests and reimbursement claims on behalf of the grantee. So make sure that the person authorized by the grantee is the person who will be doing this. An executed governmental resolution or a GRR is required to establish the authorized responsible government official. So we recommend using a job title in the GRR, naming the authorized in the name instead of a name, I should say. So they don't need to execute a new GRR if there's any staff turnover. Oops. So this slide shows the GRR template that's to be used by grantees when establishing the ARGO. The GRR must include the language in the red box. It is not required that you use this template, but you do need to have all the content that is required. So remember to contact your regional non-point source coordinator early to discuss your project. Ideally, a month beforehand is preferred at least. You need to actually have a conversation, so not leaving, sending an email or a voicemail. Really, you should discuss the project eligibility, any potential prorating, what BMPs are planned, for permits that might be needed, water quality need, and any water quality monitoring would also be required to be discussed at this point. So I also get many questions about which grant should I apply for? So here are some questions to think about when you do have the discussion with your regional non-point source coordinator. Are you trying to address a non-point source pollution or stormwater runoff problem? Which BMPs do you have planned? Is a project in a TMDL area, and how do you plan to meet the TMDL goals in this project? Is it addressing non-compliance with an NR 151 performance standard or prohibition? Is it existing non-compliance? Are you a local unit of government? What is the water quality need? Is it an urban area? Is it existing urban or new development? Are you trying to meet your WPDS permit requirement? And do you have jurisdiction over the project area, or do you have an intergovernmental agreement? So all of these questions are things that the answers to these will help you and your coordinator figure out if you're applying for the appropriate grant. and if your project is eligible. Here again is a map with the contacts. All right. So now I'm going to talk about what is new and how the applications have changed since last year. So we fixed any minor errors that we discovered in the last grant cycle. We tried every year to clarify scoring criteria and questions. We also added to the assembling and submitting your applications section. We are requiring electronic submission, and there are instructions in the application and instructions on how to do that. We also added a note about referencing long documents. So if you are referencing a document, you need to either summarize that section with page numbers cited in order to be scored, because the scoring groups will not go and read that entire long document. We also removed the requirement in the GRR template for the authorized representative to sign and submit the interim and final reports. And we made this change to accommodate the switch from the paper final report forms to the electronic data system, as I mentioned earlier, BITS, which is BMP Implementation Tracking System. We also clarified some language related to cost sharing on CAFO cropland. We added the following sentence. We did not change anything, we just added this to our instructions, and it says cropland included in a CAFO nutrient management plan is not eligible for cost share funds. We added some information to the field evaluation section. So applicants should work with the regional non-point source coordinators to discuss an optional monitoring plan. This should happen early in the cycle. The regional non-point source coordinator will work with the DNR water quality biologist to determine the appropriate monitoring strategy for that project. So this is an optional section, but points will not be given if the monitoring strategy has not been signed and approved by the DNR water quality biologist and attached to the application, and that this process was followed. Also changed this year was how we will fund lake sediment treatments. So starting this year, lake sediment treatments will only be eligible in small scale agricultural TMDL trim grants and not in large scale trim grants. The grant application will be scored and ranked based on the project that can be funded in the 2-year grant period. So this may not cover the funding for the entire project. Applicants will be able to apply in successive years if needed. And we made this change to spread out the limited funds because limited eligible funding sources more evenly for the non-structural practices. As I shared earlier, the only funding sources that can fund that are the segregated funds and the 319, federal 319 funds. So we have limited funds. And we also wanted to match the funding caps more closely with the surface water grant program for lake sediment treatments. The other thing we changed is we added a section for disadvantaged community bonus points. So environmental justice is a national and state priority, and the Watershed Management Bureau has an opportunity to incorporate environmental justice into the TRIM grant program by providing bonus points to applicants if the community affected by the grant project is disadvantaged and if the project benefits this community. So ideally, this will spread out the limited grant project dollars and work toward a goal that all people receive the benefits of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, regardless of race, national origin, or income. So how are we doing this? The applicant will be asked to list the town, village, or city where the project is located, or a list of all communities within the project area. The applicant will explain how the project benefits the community where it's located or the communities. If the project benefits the community of where it's located, the department will calculate a disadvantaged community index for the town, village, or city after the application has been submitted to determine if the project qualifies. So for large-scale projects with multiple communities, the department will calculate it in area weighted average for the listed towns, villages, and cities. So the index is calculated using the methodology detailed in section X of the Clean Water Fund Program Intended Use Plan. The methodology can be found on our website and includes the following factors: population, median household income, family poverty percentage, population trend, unemployment rate, and the lowest quintile household income. A community can benefit from a project in many ways, such as how was the community involved in the decision of where to locate the practice? In addition to the water quality improvement, what other ancillary benefits will the practice bring to the community? 5 bonus points will be added if the index is greater or equal to 110 and the applicant provides justification. And that is all I have. Are there any other questions?
Great, thanks, Joanna. We are not having any questions come in yet. I think we'll give folks just another second here. All right, well, as we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, just a reminder to everyone, this webinar was recorded, so it will take us a few days to process and transcribe the recording, but we will get that out to you as soon as possible. I think we're not seeing any questions. Dan, I'm not sure if you had a poll, but if you do, you could launch that before people.
Yes, we do have a poll that we'd like people to fill out. Just some demographic data that we could use. So fill that out as you're exiting, and we appreciate your participation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for attending today.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thanks Dan and Kareen for helping run things in the background here, and great job, Joanna.
All right, thank you.